Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is
Corey, grade A secured knockreiner.
Grade A
You can
Security.
trust
You've
my
got
mark.
your trust mark of cyber. On today's episode, we will be discussing why we may need the U.S. cyber trust mark labeling sooner rather than later, or risk having an entire manufacturer's rank of devices banned. Before that, we'll cover a security incident back home. Well, I still call it home for Corey and I in Seattle. We'll give an update on the NPD data breach from last week, and we'll give an update on the threat actor behind that breach. With that, let's go ahead and trust our way in. That's stupid. Mark our way in. I don't label our way in. Whatever. Let's just start.
Let's start.
So let's start this week with a update to one of last week's stories. If you remember, last week we chatted about the national public data breach, which caused hundreds of millions of social security numbers to become national public data, freely available for anyone.
And billions of records, although we talked about how most of them are probably duplicate with additional information or something.
Yeah. So shortly after recording that episode, cybersecurity journalist Brian Krebs published a blog post with some more information about the breach and some details about another breach involving a sister site called recordscheck.net. So first off, a couple tidbits from Krebs. He pointed out that there were, despite 2 billion records, there were in fact 272 million individuals affected with their social security numbers being leaked, including quite a few deceased people. That doesn't mean 272 currently living folks, but still a massive number.
Those who listened to before, we did a little bit of math, 333 million approximately people in the US. I think the Equifax thing said it lost 146 or 47 million social security numbers. This one's obviously bigger. I think it's mostly because of deceased. I assume the only thing missing of the 333 million Americans is they probably don't have, I assume 40% of those are kids under 18 in the US population. And not that they don't have social security numbers, but they don't have credit history that might leak them.
Yep. And in theory, this is anyone that's ever had even more than just had a background check, because in theory, this is their database of information they use to do the background checks too, potentially.
Yeah.
So
it could even be maybe not even loan or credit, but going in for significant healthcare or something. I think, unfortunately, healthcare is one of the organizations that repeatedly ask you for your social security number. But yeah,
annoyingly.
I think that's the one other place you might get extra people that are not credit or money related.
But so he also shed some light on what I think might be it's not exactly how the breach occurred, but there's some additional info in here that gives us some ideas about how it could have potentially occurred. So the second breach he found,
show how great the security was of the company, assuming these theories work out.
So the second breach was involving a sister site called recordscheck.net, which he noted is basically like a mirror. It looks just the same, and the login is almost identical as well. They found a archive on that site at a undisclosed location on there called members.zip, which included the source code and plain text administrative credentials for the website. The source code indicates a few interesting things. So records check users all are initially assigned the same 6-character password, and they are not forced to change it, though they do have the option to. The admin credentials were identical to credentials exposed in a previous data breach involving NPD's founder, Sal Verini. And the source code also indicated that this website was developed by a contractor in Lahore, Pakistan, called creationnext.com, whose website has a prominent testimonial from Sal themselves. So a couple things to unpack in there. First off, all users being initialized with a same 6-character password is bad news bears.
Yeah.
That's insane in my mind. Like a
I mean, I
random
don't think
number
you should
generator.
ever do it. But if you are going to do it, it shouldn't be you're given the same password and everyone and asked to change it. The only time I think it would be okay to have a hard coded first password is if the user is required, like programmatically required to change it on the first. And even then, it's a dumb idea because if someone gets the account before you, they can change your password knowing this. So it definitely ideal if it wasn't the same 6 characters for every user to
It's like,
start, but at
first
least
off, like
force the change.
6 characters, first off, is just like,
Yeah, that's
what the hell?
stupid.
Yeah. And then
Brute forced in less than an hour. I
brute
mean, even
forced
if
in
it were
like less
salted.
than a minute, I imagine. And second, like, I recognize this site probably wasn't made in 2024, but it is 2024 and we have mechanisms to randomly generate passwords now and like any
Yeah.
library under the sun that you would need. So
And
starting with a
password
hard coded
reset
one.
mechanisms that don't even require an initial password, that you can start right into a password reset that gives the user a way to make a unique
Yeah.
password immediately.
Or I don't know, here's a wild thought. Maybe for the account creation form, it's got a field that says enter in a password for your account.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be interesting? So that's item number one. And I'll turn the SAS down a little bit for the second one.
I
But
like the SaaS.
the admin credentials that were exposed in a previous breach, meaning they were likely reused with other accounts too, and this being associated with the owner, who also is the owner of the website that lost 272 million social security numbers. I'm willing to guess there's at least a high probability that they were reusing admin credentials all over the place and they got breached several years ago, ended up on the dark web, and Mr. US DOD was able to just log straight in and download everything off the site. Like that sounds like the what I would have done if I were in the attacker's shoes.
Yep.
But
Silly. I'm curious
it's
how many characters was that? It'd be nice to know how many characters the admin's reused password was. Hopefully that at least is more than 6. But
probably 7.
somehow, yeah.
They went for high security on that one.
Uh,
It's a. I'm going to hop back up on the soapbox again. So, despite the fact that we should not be using social security numbers as a like authenticator in order to sign up for credit or go to the hospital or whatever, we do currently use that. And it
yeah.
really feels like we need some, like, nothing's going to happen to this guy. Like, he might get, they're getting sued by their customers. There's not going to be
Yeah.
any like regulatory action against them for leaking hundreds of millions of social security numbers.
Doesn't
We
feel
really
like it
need
now.
some sort of like privacy protection and like data safeguarding protections in the United States
We
because this
need a
is
GDPR that's
negligence.
federal. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely need a GDPR that's federal. I mean, as much as we're a company that I will have to say it's sometimes a pain in the butt when you're in another country than Europe having to follow GDPR in certain ways because they don't necessarily make it easy even to do the right thing. But you can see it's definitely working for Europe to help regulate and put teeth behind making companies protect this information for you. And other than the CCPA, the California one, which at least we do have enough cross business across US states that many people have to pay attention to that. I agree with you. We predicted a federal version of GDPR many years ago, and I'm surprised they still don't have it. By the way, I did want to follow up. I mean, this was in the last thing, so we won't spend more than a minute, but just for practical tips for users, you can find out at various sites you might see on the screen if you're watching YouTube whether or not your data is in this. It very likely is if you're an adult in the United States. In fact, I almost guarantee it. I don't think it's much change from the Equifax situation, but if you followed that long ago and you're like me and Mark, you'll remember that we freeze our credit all the time. Unfortunately, you really mostly just need addresses, phone numbers, emails, and a social security number to create identity in some places. So, and potentially open up a line of credit if it's not in person. So be sure to have a credit freeze if you're worried about it. It's the best way to protect yourself against this until the government gets its head out of its place it shouldn't be and actually passes a federal privacy law that puts some teeth into people that make things too easy and lose all
Yep.
our data.
The sites that Corey was showing, it's npdbreach.com and npd.pentester.com. I will say the first one weirds me out a little bit, that one of the ways to check if your information was leaked is to enter in your social security number.
Yeah, the email, I'm bad enough with the email, although that's at least public and linked to you. But I always feel weird even sharing "Have I been pwned?" because I'm telling people to enter something like their name, and sometimes they want even the MPD pen test one. They're trying to at least make sure they're only giving the information to that real person. So besides your name, they do ask for your birth date. But I do
Good thing
think
that's
maybe
not
they even
public.
last for the last 4 of the social too, not the full thing though.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is,
But
even
the
if
thing
you
is, it's
weren't a victim of
leaked.
these breaches,
It
yeah.
seems awkward, but the data, like you and I could go download this off a torrent right now if we wanted to.
Yep.
It's too late for that piece of information, anyways. If you think about it, it's already gone. So
It
might as
is
well enter it
gone.
in one more site if they're going to check for you.
Might as well. So moving on, though, to a related story. So if you remember, this breach was
Yeah, very
caused by
related.
an individual going by the name of US DOD. They've sometimes also been called Equation Corp. They were also the hacker behind FBI's
Asian group.
InfraGard breach back in the 2022 timeframe. Well, on July 29th of this year, US DOD, the user, not the government agency, published a 53 megabyte file containing 103,000 lines of information they claimed was from CrowdStrike's internal threat intelligence platform. They claimed to have scraped the entire 250 million record collection from CrowdStrike's portal. CrowdStrike, by the way, did say this is not a breach. This is public intel data available to our tens of thousands of customers, blah, blah, blah. Well, it does seem to have ticked off CrowdStrike because now they've turned around and doxed US DOD, meaning they found their identity and gave it to local law enforcement. We know this because US DOD released a statement basically saying, hats off to CrowdStrike. They found me out. And it was this whole paragraph, which you'll show on the screen, but it's actually kind of interesting. Like, they seem to have at least a little bit of remorse. They don't have delusions that they were going to remain undetected for the rest of their life. And they're basically kind of giving up. Like he said, I won't run. I'm in Brazil, the same city where I was born. I am a huge, valuable target, and maybe I will talk soon to whoever is in charge, but everyone knows that I'm behind US DOD. I'm human like anyone else. To be honest, I wanted this to happen. I can't live with multiple lives, and it's time to take responsibility for every action of mine and pay the price. Doesn't matter how much it'll cost me. It's interesting. I can't remember the last time I've seen a confession by a a high profile hacker or
No,
data leaker like this.
it's hard to get it because I'm trying to find like he also ends, by the way, I'll see you around. Don't worry, Brazilian authorities, I'm coming to meet you. And he says something like, I'm not a threat. I can do much for my country. It's almost like he wants to be caught so he can be turned to doing government work that he couldn't have just applied for. I don't know. It's weird. I wonder. I mean, we all have our quirks and mental illness, but it's like he was doing it against his own will, type of
I
thing.
mean,
Like,
there
you
is
could he just not
a
help himself? He didn't consider it malicious. I don't know. It's definitely unique, Mark. You're right about that.
I don't want to say it's a legitimate career path, but there is a career path some folks have taken where they do a crime, get thrown in prison with a sweetheart deal for 3, 4 years, and then go found a cybersecurity company and make millions.
For sure, or get hired. I mean, Sabu, I forget his real name. I think he's a Floridian, but he is one of the people that was part of LulzSec, and he was the first person that the FBI caught. But then they basically turned him into an informant, and he continued quote unquote hacking, but really informing on people. It's definitely in reality and in movies you see authorities catch criminals and sometimes use them for good instead of throw them straight in jail. But I don't know. It just seems it's definitely interesting and weird. Yeah.
It was super interesting. So it is an individual in Brazil named Luanji. They redacted his last name, but I imagine because Brazil has extradition treaties with the US and this guy ticked off enough people, including the FBI themselves, this won't be the end of the story from them, and they most likely will be having a discussion with the authorities at some time soon. But I thought it was interesting that, like, in his little confession, he basically said, CrowdStrike doxed me. Other people found out first. I think he pointed to Intel 421 as another organization that found him.
InfraGard something was on the list, I think, too, he mentioned.
But there seems to have been a trend lately of private organizations like CrowdStrike and others outing the identities of cyber criminals. There was a talk that I think you were there too, Corey, the very first talk at DEF CON this year with John DiMaggio. Were you at that one, the Ransomware Diaries guy?
Yeah. Talking about Lockbit and his friendship / whatever with over time with the Lockbit creator.
If you guys aren't familiar with John DiMaggio, he's the author of the Ransomware Diaries, which is a fantastic read of basically him infiltrating Lockbit and all of Lockbit's affiliates to try and figure out the identity of this guy. And it's a story of him like building an actual relationship with the person over time.
I think he even alluded to, well, he couldn't always get there for it, but the type of boards and the type of places you have to go nowadays to get to that level of criminal, they don't just let you on anonymously or let you pay to join. They ask you to do some crimes. And I think even in one of his talks, he's like, he tried to prove some hacks, but he wasn't able to actually, at some point he realized he didn't want to actually do the ethical things he had to, but it was a very deep infiltration that actually required that he really act like a somewhat gray, malicious person just to get accepted, and likely had to do a few things, maybe right on the edge of horrible.
But spoiler alert, he was able to ultimately find the identity of the Lockbit ransomware operator, the author, and it was around the same time the FBI was able to get their identity. And basically the FBI released their indictment, and then John DiMaggio published like a 30-something page docs of everything about this dude online, like that next morning.
Yeah, John pretty much, I felt like he had everything, but he was trying to dot his I's and cross his T's. And when he learned about the FBI coming out, he wanted to show that he had already done all the information. I figured it out too. So I had to rush.
Yeah. Anyways, crazy story. I think media.defcon.org should have the recording of it. And it was probably my favorite talk I went to at DEF CON just because it was so engaging. He's a very good storyteller.
Yeah, he is a fun storyteller for sure.
But another example of a private citizen, in this case, doxing a threat actor. It's like, I always would have expected this to come from law enforcement, but it seems like private companies and private citizens may be better placed or have less red tape preventing them from being able to find these identities. It's interesting. I don't know.
I feel like at the very least, U.S. needs some sort of case that's active before they start looking, whereas people that are floating around on the underground can do whatever they want. I don't know.
Befriend them.
It is interesting. I think the government and intelligence agencies are good at cybersecurity and are getting better, but I used to think all the new action and research actually comes from private business more than them. So not overly surprised it's businesses and individuals.
And that does actually
there's less red
with
tape. There's less hands behind your back. Law enforcement has to have probable cause and all kinds of things to start, whereas a hobbyist or a company can just look into what they want to look into as long as they're not breaking the law. Or maybe some of them do.
What the FBI has been saying too, with they want to try and leverage their private partnerships as much as they can, because in some cases, companies like Microsoft and others are better positioned to take action.
They just see everything from all the endpoints. Yeah,
exactly. The U.S. government likes to pretend they aren't watching everything we do online, and so they work with private companies instead.
They see. Yeah, I'm definitely interested to see what happens, and we hear more about what his motive was for originally doing this, because I don't know if he's made money from any of these leaks. Like Lockbit, at least, was like, that guy was not a good guy. That was a criminal that knew what he was doing was crime, that was still stealing tens of millions from many companies and people. And I guess even Robin Hoodie, I mean, Lockbit, part of the things that Joe hated about the Lockbit guy was he went after children's hospitals and healthcare. So that was a true criminal. This guy has done leaks, but I can't, like, all of his stuff seems to be more attention getting than crime. So I would just love to figure out what his motive was. And if he just couldn't help himself, he's like back in the 80s, before there was much pursuing of computer fraud and abuse act, like a lot of early hackers started out by exploring systems, not maliciously, but definitely getting into things they shouldn't. I wonder if that was in part his motivation, but he lives in a world where it's actually prosecuted now.
Yeah. I'm sure that will come out in the inevitable court date.
Hope so. Although I did read one thing in the article, while you mentioned that Brazil does have partnership with the US to extradite, apparently they don't extradite their own citizens very often. They'll extradite, like, I don't know, Russian or other citizens that come to their country to the US. But there was a little blurb about that. Sometimes they don't extradite their own citizens. So we'll see.
But in that case, they do at least still charge them locally. So even if it isn't the US DOJ leading it, maybe, I don't know, would you rather go through the US's court systems or Brazil's court systems, Corey?
I honestly don't know in this case. I mean, Brazil seems pretty, although Brazil's recovering from that craziness with their politicians. But yes, you make a good point. Part of me would say the US, at least I know it will try to follow rules, but lately that doesn't always seem to be the case.
That is correct. All right. Moving on, there's a pretty topical story that hits a bit close to home.
For us, yeah. And it may not be for all of our listeners, but this is a local one for us.
And still evolving, where over the weekend, the Port of Seattle, which is responsible for like maritime operations in Seattle, as well as the SeaTac International Airport, suffered a cyber attack which disrupted nearly all of their services. Their baggage sorting was basically non-existent. Arrival and departure screens were totally blank. The shared check-in kiosks were down. The airport's mobile app was down, and then the maritime phone lines and emails were all down as well too. I saw a tweet from like Alaska Airlines over the weekend basically saying, do not check a bag in Seattle or you won't get it. As the time of this recording, early Monday morning, the systems are still down. They had a press conference on Sunday saying they detected unauthorized activity on their systems Saturday morning and are working with outside experts to investigate and respond. This all sounds like they got nailed with a ransomware attack, or they saw something else and then yanked the plug in response, or both.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, unfortunately, they're still in the investigate state. Even I guess this would be the third day later, considering it happened at like 9 a.m. Sunday, or I'm sorry, Saturday. But they haven't said what. But I mean, the immediate assumption is ransomware. It could be wrong, but I mean, why else would many systems go down? That said, it feels targeted, like I don't know enough about airports to know this, but even though there's different airlines, does the airport itself have its own systems that take care of internal baggage handling, for instance? You know, the machines around it. Yes, Delta, United, all of them have different tags or whatever, but is it generally the same system for the airport? Because this isn't all airports, so it seems like it's not targeting a particular airline. This is just SeaTac. So it's interesting that it seems to be affecting systems that are SeaTacs directly, and it's not affecting other airlines or other airports necessarily, just SeaTac.
The baggage system is theirs, and apparently international flight check-in is theirs as well too. They were saying all airlines were having to manually enter information for international flights too. So that sounds like another shared system. Like the reason,
like
even though
maritime facility phone systems were down, so maybe this really truly, well, I think the news on Saturday came out very SeaTac focused. Maybe it is actually Port of Seattle focused because it happens that those SeaTac systems are part of the same network as some of the maritime stuff. If the phone systems for the maritime faculties are down as well, facilities, I should say.
But even though this is strictly Seattle, it's, I think, an interesting example of how disruptive a cyber attack against one of these like central authorities in transportation could be. Like,
no doubt.
We don't know what it is. It sounds like a ransomware attack, but imagine, let's say next year, God forbid, like China decides they want to take over a tiny island off their coast and it triggers a war. And all they would have to do is disrupt like airports to cause chaos in the United States like crazy.
Yeah, I could get even more dystopian. Imagine some, adversarial country literally sends a bomb our way that's going to affect tens of thousands, but meanwhile there's a cyber attack on trains and gas stations. They're thinking everyone in those cities will want to get out right before or as a bomb is launching intercontinentally, and then all those systems go. Yeah, it's
Yeah, that's
bad enough
terrifying.
on a
Thanks,
normal
Corey.
day. It's bad enough on a normal day to just 3 days of not being able to fly out very easily. I'm glad you weren't in Seattle this week, Mark. But imagine if they time it with other situations. It's definitely scary stuff. It's stuff that we should pay attention, and whoever is behind it, if it is a person, should pay for it.
Well, good news that international relations around the world are cooling down and not heating up, right?
Yeah. Good thing there's no wars that are just popping up out of nowhere.
Man.
That we all have our politics in order. There's no polarization in the world, and we all just get along.
Well, how about instead
I'm
of ending
glad.
on a doom and gloom one, we move on to
We should do one more. Less doom and gloom.
mutually hating on another country and their IT equipment. How does that
Oh
sound?
yeah, I guess this one is another one that goes that direction. Now that we've
So
killed Port of Seattle, what's next?
the last story. So a couple weeks ago, two ranking representatives on the U.S. House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party. Pause. Holy crap, that is quite a mouthful of a
It's the
committee in the
government.
U.S. House
What
of
do you
Representatives.
expect? The
But
document you
anyways,
got this from isn't any easier, Mark, too. It's quite a dense letter. But anyways,
yeah.
keep going.
So the two ranking members on this committee wrote a letter to the Department of Commerce in the U.S. pleading for an investigation into the Chinese network equipment manufacturer TP-Link. There are a few like hot takes in here that I want to read. So there's one quote that says, "Open source information indicates that the company may represent a serious threat to the U.S. ICTS security. An increasing number of outside researchers and analysts have identified specific concerns about the risks posed by TP-Link. And TP-Link's unusual degree of vulnerabilities and required compliance with the People's Republic of, what is it, PRC, Chinese
People's
Communist Party
Republic of
law,
China.
yeah, are in and of themselves disconcerting." Basically, they're saying huge amount of risks. These routers are being sold in like U.S. military installations under the exchanges. And they're pleading for the Department of Commerce to effectively investigate and most likely ban these devices.
Well, they're very popular. I
They are
mean,
extremely
this
popular.
TP. I have, as I've pointed out, just to remind everyone, TP-Link has had some big vulnerabilities. It showed up in our news recently and other vendors, but in our last internet security report, we talked about not the Mirai, they spelled it Miori, a variant of the Mirai bot called Miori, and it was actually exploiting a previous TP-Link gaming vulnerability that was, I think it's of their wireless router and has a CVS of 10, so a very horrible flaw that was quite easy to exploit. And just like the VPN filters, the Cyclops Blink, we've seen nation state actors start to leverage these router vulnerabilities to attack in botnets in other countries. In this case, that TP-Link router firmware, similar to what we found in our report, was being compromised, and a backdoor was being put on it to create a botnet in the EU. Multiple other botnets were exploding because of this TP-Link issue. So we saw it in our own report data. So I'm not particularly surprised, and anyone with any router equipment should be worried about this. But I guess the meat of this we ought to talk about, Mark, is this. I think what makes it weird, and what made it weird for Huawei too, and even with all the bans, is I think we worry about the People's Republic of China because we know their government's own businesses there. The government can go in at any time and do things. They don't have the same, declaration of independence with freedom between state and business that we have. So the question is TP-Link just a crappy, inexpensive company that's not paying much attention to security, and these are just vulnerabilities that are popping up and being exploited? Or is what these senators seem to be worried about, or is this the PRC purposely making these TP-Link devices vulnerable for use in situations like this? And
It
that
is
Russian threat actors have
extreme
done too.
tinfoil hat territory for that, but that seems to be what they're trying to
It's what
like
they're
allude
alluding
to
to
in
for
this.
sure. And it's hard for me to go. I want to have protection. I want to have some sort of government, even Western US protection against systems that are overly vulnerable and prove negligence over and over again. But I don't know where you start this dangerous, slippery slope of just banning entire devices from another country because like the letter says they do have information that it could be associated with the PRC. I wish we knew some of that information. Because is this a DJI ban because there really is a threat from DJI that they're actually trying to map the world through their drones? I bring up DJI because that's a ban that affects me personally. Or is this, uh, you know, just a company that doesn't care too much about security because it makes cheap devices that just happens to have a lot of vulnerabilities? It's hard to say.
For better or worse, like you just pointed out, there is now recent precedent for all of this. Like Kaspersky,
Yeah,
DJI, Huawei a few years ago, like the US Department of Commerce and just the government in general seems to be handing out these bans against technologies pretty rapidly now, way more than
they
I
are.
remember.
TikTok. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's why on one hand, if they know things and they really are trying to protect us from a known thing with evidence, I can be understanding. But my slippery slope warning is I feel like this just becomes a new Cold War where China and Russia are now going to ban Cisco and ban, I don't know how you ban Microsoft, but you know what I mean. We'll pick certain US companies that honestly, is Facebook all that much better than TikTok? On one hand, I might argue that yes, it takes a little more for the US government to get that data on citizens from Facebook, you would hope. On the flip side, there's still a corporation that's evading our privacy on purpose for their own best interests. So, if the Chinese government is booby trapping products from their nation and sending it to us, we need to know and we need to protect against it. But it's hard to say without seeing the actual evidence. And most of the evidence we see could just as easily just be I've seen the same level of CVS 10 vulnerability from US organizations that haven't put focus on security. So it's hard to say. I'm very pro
Yeah.
US and anti China government.
I think that's where I align as well. Like I firmly believe that the US government is probably doing exactly everything that it's accusing China of doing. Like, especially overseas, I bet we use a lot of our products and services as intelligence sources.
But I feel like there's even a case where maybe Cisco wasn't doing it, but the CIA literally intercepted Cisco devices in transit, backdoored them before they reached a foreign country. So I know that was a one-time situation. It's not like all the products are backdoored. But yeah, we've done similar things before
I
as
mean,
our espionage.
the NSA has an extremely high profile backdoor in Microsoft Windows that's re releasing in October called Recall.
Oh yeah.
So, exactly. So, but, maybe this is just bordering on like, I don't know, American exceptionalism, but I do at least somewhat trust my country, or at least I know even if I disagree with my government, they are generally aligned with my own best interests
Yeah,
at a
that's the
macro
case.
level,
That's
at
why
least.
I can't just let it, like I can't just ignore this either. I'm hoping they have something there
That said,
to prove why they're doing this. But and like you say, I trust them more. We do actually have more freedoms, and we could actually speak out against our government without going to jail.
If they do end up banning TP-Link devices beyond network equipment too, I am personally screwed because every single light switch in my house and like 20 of my plugs are TP-Link smart devices to control everything. And that's going to be a nightmare.
They work. Their wireless gaming router is pretty good.
Yeah. And they're cheap, which is why I got them.
Yeah.
But who knows? Maybe I've allowed a, Communist Party botnet into my house.
I wish that the government was, I know they always have to protect sources. I wish there were some way they could share the evidence. Like I think we all want to support our intelligence agencies and governments if they really are going after countries that are undemocratic, that don't even give their own citizens freedom, and especially ones that seem to be using technology to target other countries. I think we want to know that, and we want to support the democratic countries around the world that are trying to protect freedom and privacy and your right against buying backdoored equipment. It's hard. I don't want to ever become, I'm not a fan of the Chinese government, but I'm a fan of China and Chinese people. And so we need to find a way to not just ban things because of a potential and because of mistrust, and maybe even as a weapon when we're trying to negotiate things. We need to have a little better proof that it really is because of a government connection of some sort. I don't know how they share that without sharing their sources, but I wish they could.
Well, one last hot take, actually. So, it was 2 years ago now, the White House released the National Cybersecurity Strategy. One of their stated goals is to improve overall security resilience across the United States.
Yeah.
Maybe banning hyper vulnerable devices like this is that.
Yeah. This helps that for sure.
Exactly.
But another way to do it, if they're not, the ban to me feels like they're saying the government is doing something wrong. Another way you could do that is allow these devices to come out, but have some sort of, like we used to talk about, FDA security grade. I say Food and Drug Administration, like instead of a calorie grade, you have a security grade. And I'd be much better with them letting DGA and TP-Link exist, but with Fs, like a big solid F on the packaging saying this thing is full of potential vulnerabilities. Because then that at least talks about, they're trying to do something to improve infrastructure. I don't know. It's interesting. We'll see what happens.
The U.S. Cyber Trust Mark is, I think, just finishing up.
Getting close.
What do they call it? Like the notice for proposed rulemaking and comments period. And so that is coming soon. They even have a fancy little logo for it, where sometime soon your IoT devices may have a trust mark that you can scan the QR code and understand the security impact. That said, my parents will never do that. And the average citizen will never do that.
They won't pay attention to that?
I don't think so. That's asking too much.
I'm a calorie counter now, so I look at them all the time on food. But I guess I am actually, when I talk to calorie counting to anyone else, they're like, no way. So you're probably right. Most people won't do it.
And so you are the target audience for this, but the everyday citizen is not. But it's coming. It is at least.
I don't know. There is stuff that, remember when they showed pictures of lungs on cigarettes? It didn't stop the people that were definitely going to do it, but it did have enough people notice that smoking did go down. So I don't know. If you place something really big, I agree with you. If someone just wants cheap and easy, they may still ignore it. But who knows?
What's the
we'll see. Hopefully,
cyber,
but I don't.
What's the cyber equivalent of like an abscess in a lung that they put that picture on top of the cigarette carton?
I don't know, a hole into your. I don't,
because maybe I get what you're saying.
Video of a living room with someone obviously spying through your TV or something.
We're gonna require like all TP-Link devices to have like a wrapper with just some like grotesque security event on the front of it, like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
disgusting sextortion. People might be spying on you. Be careful.
Man,
your bank account may be drained. Be careful.
It definitely is if you are if you don't have your credit frozen thanks to Mr. US DOD and leaking everything. All right.
Fun week.
On that happy mark. Yeah. Keep an eye out for the US Cyber Trust Mark for all the good it will do. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, you can please rate, review, and subscribe. You should. Absolutely do it. Now, if you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Instagram. We're at watchguard_technologies. Also, if you have any recommendations for other social media platforms, please.
Has anything taken off? Is anyone using Threads? I don't think so. Mastodon, maybe.
We're now like 60 seconds
into the outro.
Or Mark,
you can go crawling back to X and beg for your blue verification check mark.
I am done with that because I deleted it off my phone. Yes. Anyways, is anyone even still listening at this point? If so, reach out to us on watchguard_technologies and you will get a crisp high five. Thanks again for listening, and you will hear from us next week.